Welcome to Crying Inside, where every family story matters and every tear has a voice. We believe that behind every smile, there may be silent pain waiting to be heard. This is a safe space for emotional family stories, deep life lessons, and stories of inner strength from the Philippines and beyond. Today's story is not just about conflict. It's about humiliation, silence, and a forgiveness that doesn't erase the past but can change the future. This is a Filipino family story that will take you on the journey of a daughter-in-law who chooses dignity over anger and a mother-in-law who realizes that pride can sometimes weigh heavier than regret. If you've ever cried quietly without letting the world know, if you've ever hidden your pain just to protect the ones you love, then this channel is for you. We share stories that many are afraid to speak out loud, so you know you're not alone. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the most touching Filipino family stories and healing lessons. All character names, locations, and identifying details in the stories have been changed to protect privacy. But the emotions, lessons, and truths you're about to hear are inspired by real events. Now, let's begin. That noon, the sun at San Pedro Public Market was so harsh that everyone just wanted to finish their shopping and go home quickly. But right in the middle of the narrow alley, crowded with fish stalls and vegetable stands, a woman knelt down. It was Aling Teresa, known by everyone in this market for her toughness and unyielding words. She knelt upright, her trembling hands placing a pink dress on the market floor. The dress was clean, with neat new stitches, but everyone knew it had been torn apart 5 days earlier in front of the crowd. Her voice was hoarse, swallowing her pride with every word. "I was wrong to my daughter-in-law. I'm sorry." The market calls fell silent. The fish seller put down his knife. The vegetable buyer stopped. Neighbors glanced at each other and then looked away. No one laughed, and no one raised their phones to record. Only the sound of wind slipping through the tarps remained, carrying a strange silence. A silence that weighed heavily on the chest. 5 days ago, right here, Liza, her daughter-in-law, was having her dress torn apart by the mother-in-law in front of her own son. The 5-year-old boy stood frozen, eyes wide with fear. The clip capturing that moment spread all over social media, sparking thousands of comments, arguments, and judgments. And now, the very person who caused it all is kneeling here. Not everyone would dare to do that. And sometimes apologies aren't enough to heal the wounds. But what puzzles everyone is, why isn't Liza here today? And what happened in the past 5 days that made a proud mother-in-law bow down in front of the whole marketplace? Liza is 28 years old now, working as an accountant at a small company in the neighboring town. She's the kind of person everyone finds gentle, soft-spoken, and never loud. Friends often say Liza is more family-oriented than self-focused, always putting her husband, kids, and in-laws before herself. Since getting married, she moved in with Marco's family in Binyan, Laguna. Marco, her husband, is 32 and works as a construction engineer. He's not a bad man and truly loves his wife and child. But there's one thing that often disappoints Liza. Whenever there's conflict between his wife and mother, he usually stays silent. For Marco, silence is meant to keep things from getting worse, but for Liza, it feels like being abandoned. The toughest person in the house is Aling Teresa, 55 years old, Liza's mother-in-law. She sells dried fish, dried shrimp, and other dried seafood at Binyan's famous marketplace. She's known for being quick and sharp, with a voice that carries down several stalls, and especially for her pride. Everyone knows she's hot-tempered and doesn't like to be contradicted, even by family. The Marco family's house isn't very big, but it's home to 3 generations living together. Their daily meals are always filled with children's laughter and mother-in-law's pointed remarks toward her daughter-in-law. The tension between Liza and Aling Teresa didn't come from one big issue, but from many little things piling up: how money was spent, how JR was cared for, even what to eat for breakfast. JR, Liza and Marco's son, is only 5 years old. The boy is Liza's joy, always running after his mom, chattering about school, and sweetly asking to sleep together. JR is innocent but very sensitive. Just a frown from his mom, or a slightly sharper tone from his grandmother, and he could sense something was wrong. Palengke, the traditional market, is closely tied to their work and serves as the stage for many family stories in this town. Here, the calls of vendors mix with bargaining voices, the smell of fresh fish blends with salty dried fish, along with the scent of freshly cut herbs. Buyers and sellers squeeze through narrow aisles, shoulder to shoulder, hands holding baskets filled to the brim. Aling Teresa's dried fish stall is near the east exit, where the morning sunlight shines directly on the hanging goods. She usually stands there, her hands quickly wrapping orders, greeting customers while keeping an eye on everything around her. For her, the Palengke is not just a place to earn a living, but also a place to keep her dignity. A single rumor here can spread throughout the town in just one afternoon. Liza doesn't go to the market often, but whenever she does, she always chooses different stalls to avoid being scrutinized by her mother-in-law's acquaintances. That morning, when the story began, Liza only planned to buy some fresh Bangus fish and a few vegetables for lunch. She never expected that this crowded, noisy Palengke would mark the biggest turning point in her marriage, where the smell of fish, the calls of vendors, and hundreds of eyes would witness a moment no one in her family could ever forget. That Saturday morning, the sky over Binyan was bright, with the town's typical humid air near Laguna. Liza took the chance to get up earlier than usual to tidy up the house before taking JR to the Palengke to buy fresh Bangus and some vegetables for lunch. She liked shopping in the morning because the fish was still fresh, the vegetables were still vibrant green, and it helped avoid the harsh midday sun. JR held his mother's hand tightly, happily walking along the narrow path leading into the market. The smells of fish, dried shrimp, and green onions mixed together, with vendors' calls blending with laughter, creating a lively atmosphere. Liza stopped in front of a Bangus fish stall just restocked from a cooler. She picked fish one by one, asked about the price, then also considered a bunch of kangkong and sayote at the next stall. She didn't notice that from the end of the row, Aling Teresa was already standing there, her eyes following every move of her daughter-in-law. In her hand was still the basket holding dried fish, the distinctive salty smell clinging to her clothes. She stepped forward, each step heavy, until a voice rang out right behind Liza, loud enough for the nearby stalls to hear. "Liza, you still dare to show your face here to buy things? Your husband's money, you think you can just spend it however you want?" The tone was sharp and full of disdain, making Liza freeze, her hand holding the bunch of vegetables stiffen. She turned to explain, but Aling Teresa stepped right up, her eyes full of anger. "This kind of Bangus, this kind of goulet. What do you think this house is? A five-star restaurant or what?" Liza blushed. JR huddled close to his mother's side, his eyes wide with fear. Liza lowered her voice. "Mom, I only bought this for lunch, nothing fancy." But her words only poured fuel on the fire. For a brief moment, before anyone could fully grasp what was happening, Aling Teresa suddenly reached out and yanked Liza's skirt from behind. The loud ripping sound echoed sharply through the market. The pale pink cotton skirt tore wide open, exposing her legs and underwear. Liza froze, quickly hugging JR, shielding him while pulling the torn skirt to cover her exposed body. The whole market seemed to freeze for a few seconds, then buzzed with whispers. Some people stepped back, others raised their phones to record. A man standing nearby blurted out, "Wow, Aling Teresa is really something." Junior burst into tears, sobbing brokenly. The little boy clung tightly to his mother's skirt, trying with his small body to shield her from the curious eyes. Liza bit her lip hard, fighting back tears. She knew if she cried or reacted now, things would only get worse and JR would be even more terrified. She bowed her head, hugged her son, and quickly walked out of the market, ignoring the whispers, the stares, and the phones pointed at her. Just a few hours later, a video less than a minute long appeared on Facebook and TikTok with the caption, "Mother-in-law humiliates daughter-in-law in the market." The clip clearly showed every second. From Aling Teresa's loud scolding to the moment Liza's skirt was torn, and JR's crying face. In less than 24 hours, the clip had hundreds of thousands of views. The comments were divided into two sides. One side defended Aling Teresa, saying she was just teaching her disrespectful daughter-in-law a lesson. The other side was furious, criticizing her for going too far, hurting her daughter-in-law and grandson in public. Every word, every comment, felt like a knife cutting into Liza's heart. When she left the Palengke market that day, Liza didn't go back to her husband's house. She took a ride straight to her mother's house in the neighboring barangay. Aling Mila's small house was tucked in a quiet alley, with a wooden fence and bright pink bougainvillea pots right at the door. As soon as Aling Mila saw her daughter and grandson, she hurried out to greet them. Seeing Liza's flushed face and swollen eyes, she didn't need to ask to know something was wrong. JR was still hiccuping, clutching his mother's neck tightly. "Child, what happened? Why is your dress torn like this?" Her voice trembling. Liza just shook her head, not answering. Isabel, her younger sister, a final-year law student, stepped out of the house and immediately sensed something was off. After hearing a brief summary from their mother, Isabel instantly understood how serious this was. Isabel pulled Liza into a room, gently set JR down with some toys, then closed the door. "Sis, I've seen it. The clip at the market is spreading on Facebook. People are sharing it everywhere. This is clearly public humiliation. We can sue her." But Liza shook her head. "No, Isabel. You don't understand. If we make a big deal of this, the one who'll get mentioned the most will be JR. He's still too young, sis. But you were humiliated in public, in front of your son. How can you stay silent?" Isabel snapped. Liza sighed, gazing out the window. Silence is a way of speaking too. Not every battle needs to be fought loudly. I don't want my child growing up with memories of a war between his mother and grandmother. She knew her sister was trying hard to stay strong and calm for the sake of her son. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Liza sat alone in front of her laptop screen. She opened Facebook and created an anonymous account. Fingers tapped slowly, spelling out each word. Some wounds don't need to be exposed for the whole world to see, because the ones who hurt the most are innocent children. I was humiliated in front of my son, but I chose to stay silent. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted to protect my child's childhood. I want when he looks back on his childhood, there are no shouts, no tears from his mother, only warm meals and laughter. The post didn't mention any names or places, but every line touched the pain of hundreds, even thousands of people. Liza didn't expect that just hours after posting, it had been shared thousands of times. The comments were full of comforting words and shared stories. Then the messages started coming in. A woman from Cebu said, "Sister, I was also humiliated by my mother-in-law in front of relatives, but no one believed me. Today, reading your story, I don't feel so alone anymore." A mother from Davao wrote, "I cried while reading. I used to think I was weak because I didn't dare to fight back. But now I understand. Staying silent to protect my child is also a kind of strength." And so, Liza's anonymous inbox filled with heartfelt confessions. Many women shared their stories, the silent wounds they carried for years. Some sent family photos, others just messaged briefly. "Thank you for speaking for me." Liza read every message, feeling both warmed and weighed down. She didn't know how many people she had become a support for, but she knew one thing: she was no longer alone. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Mrs. Ailing Teresa also started hearing whispers about the viral post. She didn't know who wrote it, but reading it made her uncomfortable, like someone was bringing up the market incident again. She ignored it, thinking everyone would forget in a few days. She didn't realize this was just the beginning of a change she never expected. That night, after everyone at her mother's house was asleep, Liza lay still in her room, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The silence seemed to open a door for memories to flood back. She recalled her years as a daughter-in-law, the early days full of hope and faith. When she first came to her husband's house, she always believed that as long as she was sincere, caring, and loving, all distances would fade away. She once carried Aling Teresa to the hospital when she had a high fever and joint pain so bad she couldn't walk. That day, the rain poured heavily, the road to the hospital was slippery, but Liza still pushed herself, supporting and shielding her mother-in-law from getting wet. She even cooked her favorite dishes herself, brewed warm ginger tea whenever she coughed, and stayed up all night by her bedside when she had a fever. Not only taking care of her, Liza also used nearly 200,000 pesos from her small savings to buy health insurance for her mother-in-law. She never told anyone, not even Marco, because she saw it as her responsibility and love. But none of these efforts were ever acknowledged. Not a single thank you. Instead, she faced criticism, petty complaints. The food wasn't tasty enough, the house wasn't clean enough, even coming home late was seen as neglecting the family. Marco, the one she trusted to always stand by her, often remained silent. Not just once, but many times. When Aling Teresa spoke harshly, when the atmosphere at home was thick with tension, Marco just stood there, avoiding eye contact. At first, Liza comforted herself, thinking he just wanted to avoid conflict. But over time, she felt that silence was more like abandonment. Every time Marco stayed quiet, a piece of her trust fell apart. She also remembered the one time Marco had a chance to defend her, but still chose silence. That day, Liza had a nearly 39-degree fever, her body shaking with chills. But Aling Teresa still yelled at her to get up and cook, saying, "Women these days are too weak." Marco heard it from the stairs, but just lowered his head and walked away. Liza forced herself to get up and work, and that afternoon she fainted at the office. Those images kept flashing in her mind, mixed with JR's innocent question one peaceful evening, a few weeks before the incident at the market. That day, while they were folding clothes, JR suddenly stopped and looked up with clear eyes at his mother. The 5-year-old's innocent question was both curiosity and a reflection of what he had witnessed. She didn't know how to answer. Liza didn't want her son to grow up thinking that love means staying silent in the face of injustice. But she also didn't want to plant resentment toward his grandmother in his heart. That question stayed with her, like an echo in her mind. And now, after what happened at the market, it rings even louder. She understands that sometimes not all endurance is noble, and not all silence is understood. In the dark, Liza reached out and touched JR's hair as he slept soundly beside her. She promised herself that no matter what, her son would never grow up to be a man who stays silent when his wife needs protection. 2 days after the incident at the market, Marco went to his mother-in-law's house. He stood at the gate, his hands clenched, as if trying to summon courage. When Isabel came to open the door, her gaze was icy cold. "What are you doing here?" Isabel asked, her voice full of suspicion. I want to see Liza. Just to talk for a bit," Marco stammered. Isabel crossed her arms and stood blocking the entrance. "What do you want to say? Want to take my sister back to keep silent while your mother insults her?" He couldn't find any words to respond. The truth was, since their wedding day, he had often chosen silence instead of defending his wife. And now, that silence had pushed Liza away. Isabel looked at him for a moment, then turned and went inside. When she came back, she held a worn, hardbound notebook in her hand. She handed it to Marco. "Read this. This is what my sister has been writing down all these years as a daughter-in-law. Everything she's done for your mother." The first page had neat handwriting with dates, details of every hospital visit, every dish her mother-in-law liked, every night she stayed awake caring for her when she was sick. There were hospital bills, even a paper confirming a 200,000 peso health insurance payment money Liza took from her own savings to care for her mother-in-law. Marco read the part where Liza hurriedly wrote, "She said thank you to me today, the first time in 3 years." Suddenly his eyes grew hot. "You know," Isabel said, "she never bragged or sought credit, but that doesn't mean she doesn't deserve respect." Marco closed the notebook, holding it to his chest, like embracing a heavy regret. He said nothing more, just nodded and quietly walked away. Meanwhile, at the Palengke market, Aling Teresa began to feel the price of that day's actions. The vendors who once greeted her warmly now only gave brief nods. Some even turned their backs when they saw her. Regular customers gradually stopped coming. The gossip wasn't loud anymore, but everyone's eyes said it all. They no longer held the respect they once did. At night, she lay restless in bed, the ticking clock seeming to stretch endlessly. Every time she nodded off, images at the market came back. The torn dress, JR's cries, and especially the boy's eyes. She had watched the video online again. Not to hear the criticism, she mostly ignored the comments, but to look into those eyes. Wide open, scared eyes, then resolutely standing in front of his mother. A 5-year-old child, with tiny hands, trying to protect his mother from her own hands. She recalled the early days when JR learned to walk and talk. He used to run to hug her, chattering about school, proudly showing her scribbled drawings he called Lola and Mom. She once thought that love would last forever. But in a moment of anger, she herself broke that bond. The online comments started creeping into her mind, not the scoldings, but questions that left her choked. If you were the mother, could you bear seeing your son stay silent while your daughter-in-law was humiliated? Or, does anyone deserve to have their dress torn off in the market, in front of their grandchild? She didn't know how to answer. At night, she sat alone in the living room, her phone lighting up with a wallpaper of JR smiling brightly, sitting between her and his mother. Looking at it for a long time, her eyes stung with tears. For the first time in many years, Teresa began to admit that maybe she had been wrong more than once, and some mistakes couldn't be fixed just with excuses. That night, the wind was still in Binyan. Only distant dogs barking could be heard. In Teresa's house, the kitchen light was still on. She was trying to boil water to make instant noodles, but her steps were unsteady. She had hardly eaten anything all day. The tiredness and dizziness had lasted since morning, but she still tried to hang on. Just as she reached out to turn off the stove, a sudden dizziness hit her. Her vision darkened, and her legs felt completely powerless. She collapsed onto the cold kitchen floor, the clang of a metal pot echoing sharply before silence fell. Early the next morning, a neighbor passing by noticed the kitchen door slightly open and the light still on. When they went inside, they were shocked to see Teresa lying motionless, her lips pale and sweat cold on her forehead. A few people hurriedly ran to call for a vehicle, and finally, they took her to Laguna Provincial Hospital in an old pickup truck belonging to an acquaintance. In her handbag, they found a nearly dead phone battery. In the contacts, the closest number wasn't Marco since he was away on a job, but Liza's number. At the hospital, a young nurse called that number. Liza's sleepy voice came through the line. "Hello, who is this?" "She's in the emergency room at Laguna Provincial Hospital. Severe low blood pressure. We need a family member to come right away." The morning scene at the Palengke market flashed in her mind again, the sound of the dress ripping, JR's cries. Her heart pounded hard, mixed with a flood of emotions. Then she took a deep breath. "I'm coming." Outside, the morning mist still clung to the rooftops, and the streets were quiet. The car drove through familiar streets, Liza's heart feeling ice cold. At the hospital, the long hallway was lit by fluorescent lights, reflecting off the cold tiles. She entered room number 1-2, where ailing Teresa was lying. The woman who once stood in the market, yanking her daughter-in-law's dress hard, now lay quietly in the hospital bed. Her face was pale, and her thin shoulders lost beneath a thin blanket. Liza stood at the door for a moment, then stepped closer. She pulled the blanket up to cover her shoulders. No words of blame. Only the steady breathing of two women who once lived under the same roof, now sitting silently beside each other. After a while, ailing Teresa's hand moved gently. Slowly, she reached out and touched Liza's hand. Not a firm grip, just a trembling, weak hold. Liza looked down. Her eyes were neither pleading nor thankful. But there was something very human, very fragile in that moment. They sat like that. No one said a word. Outside in the hallway, the sound of a medical cart rolling by and nurses chatting drifted in, but inside the room, everything seemed to stop. Between the one who caused the pain and the one who endured it, there was no immediate answer to the question. Does forgiveness really start from kindness? Or from the moment we choose not to pull away when someone weak needs us? 5 days after being discharged, ailing Teresa returned to San Pedro Public Market. That morning, she wore a simple shirt and held a brown paper bag close to her chest. Inside was the pink dress she had torn apart in front of dozens of eyes. The midday sun shone down on the faded tarps. The smell of dried fish, fresh vegetables, sweat and dust mingled, so familiar that every vendor knew nothing unusual would happen today until she stopped on the small street in the heart of the market where it all began. She put the paper bag down and took out the dress, now washed and carefully sewn back together. Each stitch was like patching not just the fabric, but also the empty spaces in her heart. Then, to everyone's surprise, ailing Teresa knelt down. Her knees touched the damp, cold, hard cement floor. She looked up, her voice trembling but clear. "I was wrong to my daughter-in-law. I'm sorry." There was no whispering like before. No one laughed. No one pulled out their phones to record. Fish vendors, vegetable sellers, meat sellers, all stopped what they were doing. The chopping knives fell silent. The calls of the vendors faded away. A shrimp seller nearby wiped tears from her eyes. A rice stall owner nodded quietly, his gaze distant. Everyone knew making a public apology in a crowded market wasn't easy, especially for someone as proud as ailing Teresa. Liza wasn't there. She knew her daughter-in-law wouldn't show up, but that no longer mattered. She didn't apologize to be forgiven right away, nor to erase what had happened. She apologized because for the first time in her life, she truly saw what she had caused. The people at the market that day would tell Liza that her mother-in-law bowed her head under the midday sun, that her voice choked up when mentioning her daughter-in-law's name, and that the pink dress was laid down on the ground as an apology. No one knew how Liza would feel when she heard this story. But for those who witnessed it, that moment would linger for a long time, because they understood that some wounds don't heal right away, but at least, today, someone dared to begin sewing them back together. That afternoon, while Liza was tidying up files at the office, a message came from 8 Cora, the shrimp seller at San Pedro Market. "Anik, your mother-in-law knelt in the market today to apologize to you. She brought the pink dress that was repaired." No one laughed, only a few people cried. "I thought you should know." Liza read the message. Her hand froze. She looked out the window, where the late afternoon sunlight was spreading gold over the rooftops. Her heart beat slower, no longer feeling as heavy as it had the past few days. But she didn't immediately make arrangements to go see her. Forgiveness, she knew, isn't a door that opens right when someone knocks. It takes time. That evening, Liza told Isabel about it. Her younger sister was silent for a moment, then softly said, "At least she did something that many people don't dare to do their whole lives." Liza nodded, feeling a little lighter inside. A few weeks later, Marco returned from the construction site. He didn't try to bring Liza back to their old home, nor did he pressure her to decide quickly. Instead, he visited JR often, patiently listened, and slowly regained his wife's trust. But Liza chose a different path. She rented a small house near her office, quiet enough to raise her child and live her own life. Whenever JR asked about Lola, she still shared beautiful memories with her son, because she didn't want him to grow up remembering only the stressful days. One afternoon, JR suddenly said, "Mama, when I grow up, if anyone makes my daughter-in-law sad, I'll protect her, just like I protected you that day." Liza squeezed her son's hand tightly, tears falling without wiping them away. She knew that forgiveness didn't necessarily mean going back to how things were before. Forgiveness, to her, meant choosing not to carry anger for life so she and her son could move forward without being tied down by the past. If this family story has touched your heart, please subscribe to the Crying Inside channel, where every family story matters. Here, we don't just share stories of pain and betrayal, but also moments of quiet strength and the courage to forgive. If you want to hear more emotional Filipino family stories, deep life lessons, and inspiring healing journeys, check out other videos on the channel. Each story is a window into real emotions, and maybe somewhere in there, you'll see yourself. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the story. Your presence is a priceless gift. See you in the next video, and remember, sometimes the quietest stories leave the deepest echoes.